Hi guys, welcome to this week's episode of Heaven Returns with me, your podcast host, Tony Evans. I'm hoping that you enjoy this week's episode as I am pretty proud to say that this is one of my favourite bands slash groups of musicians going around at the moment. It is different to the last few weeks, as the last few weeks we've had mainly interviews, which has been great, and had some music on the show, which is something I want to do more of. But this is the Aristocrats, a three-piece ensemble instrumental band that play sort of hard rock, jazz fusion, prog, some metal aspects, some interesting different nuances. They have three members, all of them extremely gifted and have a vast and interesting background to all of their musical journeys. I thought I would do a instrumental album because I haven't done one yet, to my knowledge. I don't think so, no. And, I may have done, but I can't remember. To look back at the list. But I haven't done one recently. And I thought, earlier this year in March, we went and saw my friends John and Susie and Parksy, and we went and saw the band play in Sydney at the Manning Bar, I think it was. Yes, it was the Manning Bar. And it was a bit of an experience for me because I've been wanting to see them for some time. And it was an eye-opener for me because I'd always loved Guthrie Govan, who's on guitar, and to be honest, even Brian Bella and Marco Miniman in different aspects. I've always enjoyed them as musicians, but we couldn't see them when they came over the last tour with their an album or two back with Trey Calabreros in 2015 because we were that same night, I think, or maybe the night before. No, I think it was the same night. They were playing in Sydney. We were seeing Stephen Wilson doing the entire Hand Cannot Erase show. And I know that people might think, why would you skip if you like the band so much? Well, I'm a bigger Stephen Wilson fan than I am a Aristocrats fan. So when tickets came round and were available, I thought we'd go, and it was actually one of the greatest musical moments of the latter years of my life. Actually, it was very, very awe-inspiring to stand within touching reach of Guthrie Govan and watch him play guitar, and then just over his shoulder see Marco Miniman on drums, who's just an outstanding genius on the drums, and to the other side of the stage seeing Brian Bella on bass. It was something that you can't take away. It was a room full of nerds. Yes, it was. It was a room full of music lovers. That's the point. There was no jumping around and dancing, and because it's instrumental and extremely complicated instrumental music. It's a lot of concentration on the part of the listener as well as the band. So you don't end up, sort of getting into it as such. You just find yourself getting lost in watching these geniuses playing the music that they play. It's something special that sort of the universe brought to us, and it's something that you can't really put a finger on. It's something that if you ever get a chance to see them, even if you're not into instrumental music, this might be the one for you to watch, because the amount of virtuosity on show is astounding. We're all metalheads. Here we'll go, yeah, I'll go and watch, Steve Vai, Twiddly Widdly all over the place, Joe Satriani, all of that sort of stuff, Eddie Van Halen. But they seem to shy away from watching someone play a little bit more jazz fusion kind of blues prog stuff, which I find quite a bit silly. I don't know. I find it mystifying. Because it's still as energetic, it's still as powerful, it's still as emotive and emotional in its music, if not more so. And also, the band are real funny buggers. I mean, they are live, they tell a story, they're making you laugh. It's nice to hear. It was really nice to hear the band's stories behind the songs that they were playing. They mainly played from the album Duck, the new album that's just come out. They went through a few of the previous albums, and they sort of had spatterings of the Aristocrats and Culture Clash and Tres Caballeros and you know what. They had they had a few different things there, but mainly it was the new album. Now, the band themselves, we were saying, Tony, what about the band? Well, the band themselves are three, as I mentioned, three performers. Guthrie Govan on guitar, considered, in my opinion, probably the greatest guitarist on the planet. Difficult to rank, isn't it? But for me, by far one of the best guitarists I've ever seen live, and just an astonishing player. And then you have Marco Miniman on drums, who is just astounding. Like what he can do on the drums, and some of the solos he was doing, some of the sampling he was doing, was sampling this squeaky toy and looping it back in, and he was just mesmerizing on drums. And then there's Brian Bella on bass, who I don't know how he keeps up with Marco. To be honest with you, I think he deserves a medal for some in some form or another to be able to do it. And I remember asking him after the show how he did it, and he said that with a great deal of effort, because you watch him during the show live, and he actually doesn't really take his eyes off of Marco, because if he steps out of the vision, I think he will just be all over the place, because Marco, he's a act of nature, a force of nature. He doesn't really quite know where he's going. He sits in the groove. He's got obviously does what the drummer's meant to do, but the amount of movement in his playing is astonishing. So the three members, they found the band itself was founded in 2011 at the Winter NAMM meet, which that's the National Association of Musical Merchants, if you don't know what this is, where people go to show off their guitars and their pedals and all that sort of stuff, and they often have live shows. Well, the show itself was meant to be Marco Miniman, Brian Bella, and Greg Howe, who's a vastly experienced solo guitarist and instrumentalist and studio player, but also does a lot of tapping. Very, very clever player. But he pulled out for some reason, and Guthrie jumped in. They played the show to great applause, and after they finished, they came off stage, talked to each other, and said, "Look, this is amazing. What a great chemistry. Let's go and record." And so that year they followed up with an album. Took 2 weeks to record, and they came out with the original album, the first album by the Aristocrats. Now, that one is just the Aristocrats, self-titled. The album band's name comes from, I did some research, I found this fascinating. The actual band name, the Aristocrats, comes from a joke, a vaudevillian joke, mainly told from comedian to comedian, because it's extremely bad taste. It's usually very, very poor and vulgar. I won't mention the kind of topics because I don't want to get myself banned, but basically what it is it's set around a theatrical agent's office, and in come a troupe, it's either the whole troupe or someone representing the troupe, and they enact some really vulgar, racist, sexist, humor, quite has incest and things like that in it. They'll do that. When they finished, the agent looks slack-jawed and is like, "And what do you call yourself?" And they said, "We are the Aristocrats." Now, apparently, those that know this joke, they sort of hang out for the punchline, which is always the Aristocrats. Apparently, the big one that was really big for it was Gilbert Gottfried. He did it quite a lot, and mainly he did it. His big famous one is at the Friars Club, where he roasted Hugh Hefner, and it apparently was not a very, very nice thing, because it was just after 9/11, so it was very, very distasteful. Hence, and I think that's why they call themselves the Aristocrats, because tracks on the first album are all innuendos. They've all got innuendo titles, and a lot, even now in the later albums, have innuendos in their titles. They all write 3 tracks each for the band, and so there's usually only 9 tracks per album, It might be more, but it's usually 3 tracks each. And it's apparently Brian Bella wrote one uh, for Guthrie Govan, and he said that he thought of him after he had come up with the title track of the track was called Sweaty Knockers, which again, says it all, doesn't it? And then, Guthrie Govan wrote a track for Brian Bella, similar kind of thing. But then when Marco Miniman wrote one for the band, both guys just said, and I quote, "We just tried to keep up." We just tried to keep up with him, which I think is, and we were lucky to keep up, apparently, is the actual quote. So pretty interesting group of people. They all come from different backgrounds. Well, firstly, let's talk about Guthrie Govan. So Guthrie Govan, born in December of 1971, he's played in lots of bands, mainly Asia, the brilliant prog band, GPS, the Young Punks, the Fellowship. He has a solo project called the Erotic Cakes. A funny thing about that is that the warehouse where his albums were stored was stolen. It was broken into and stolen, and these thieves stole 20,000 copies of Erotic Cakes. And the record label said, well, if they can sell them, then they've got a job for life at their PR company, because apparently it was quite hard to sell this particular album because it's quite odd and slightly different. He's also worked on lots of stuff with Stephen Wilson. He worked on Cannot Erase and 4.5 and the Raven Refused to Sing. He also worked with Hans Zimmer, the German composer, on film soundtracks. I had no idea at all until I started researching this, which is something that, that's what I love about this program, doing this stuff, He was mainly worked with Hans Zimmer, as you said, who is an Academy Award-winning composer. The movie Boss Baby, X-Men Dark Phoenix, never heard of it, The Lion King, the 2009 movie, and Experiments from the Dark Phoenix. Also, June 1 and 2. Amazing. I, again, didn't really know that. He was born from a Scottish father. He's half Scottish, but his favourite guitarist is a friend of the show and one of my big heroes, Zal Clemson, from the sensational Alex Harvey band. He's also influenced by AC/DC, Cream, the Beatles, Hendrix, Zappa. He first got into music with his father, taught him a few basic chords after listening to his dad's 1950s rock and roll records, and learned to play the music by ear, the chords and the solos. So clearly a talented young man. His first appearance actually was on a TV program with his brother. He played with his brother on Thames Television's Ace Reporters back in the 80s, which is, I never even knew that before either. And he got into all the shredding kind of stuff and all that from friends at school that taught him how to do it. He's also a teacher in Brighton at music school there, which is something I find absolutely wonderful, because he's passing on his techniques, He's also a big Steve Vai fan, as I said, Frank Zappa, Yngwie Malmsteen, Alan Holdsworth, Jeff Beck. He has all these influences, blues, rock, prog rock, fusion, jazz fusion, Eric Clapton era, Cream. So all this stuff is being played, coming through him. You can hear it in his music. What he does as well is when he plays the solos, watching an interview with him, he sings the solos in his head as he's playing them. So it's like he's translating the notes in his voice in his head, because he wants the guitar to sing, not just be an instrument. He wants it to be vocal, again, which is why I think he's one of the greatest guitarists around at the moment, because he's just so technical. I watched him play. He used one pick the entire show. He would stop and he'd get the pick and he would sand it with a nail file and carry on playing in between each song. Just amazing. And he just appears not to even be trying when you watch him live, which just, astounds me. And of course, as we spoke before on the episode, when I talked about Hand That Cannot Erase, how one of the solos in that album, he just played it right through. First take, taken, then we go. Didn't have to record, rehearse. He just played the solo right through there and then. And Steve loved it and said, yep, we're sticking with that. And it is one of the best solos on the album. But yeah, just incredible guitarist. So far we've got one brilliant guitarist that's got in the band, and you think to yourself, well, how could you back up such a brilliant guitarist? Well, we now then lead into Brian Bella. Brian Bella is a bass player. Again, he's from the US, okay? Himself, a very gifted bass player, born in May of 1971 in America. He's played with Joe Satriani. He's played on Death Clock, the classic, brilliant cartoon, heavy metal cartoon Death Clock. He's been with Steve Vai. He's been with Dweezil Zappa. He's done, you name it, he's done it. James Labrie of, I always said it wrong, Labrie of Dream Theater. He's also played with him. He's had 4 solo albums. And some of them, one of the last ones, I know that my friend John bought on my suggestion at the gig, signed by Brian, and he loves it. In retrospect, I think it's his best of the 4 albums that he has released over the time. But he's also done countless, musical fill-ins and studio work and work with live. I mean, he's been playing with Steve Vai. Joe Satriani on tour. He's been Joe Satriani's tour bass player since 2013. Between 1999 and 2011, he wrote articles for Bass Player magazine. So busy man, right? He's not sitting around. He's also a bass player that I really admire, because watching him as a bass player myself, he's got big hands, right? Really big hands, and he doesn't pick. He fingers. I don't think I ever saw him pick at all during the whole time that I watched him. The nuances between the tonal differences and the craziness of Marco. It's just that beautiful clash that you get with some jazz fusion where it's not sitting with guitar, but it seems to meld with the drums, which then also melds. It's a moment of madness that seems to resolve itself every time. It is just brilliant. Now, the last album that I was mentioning is Scenes from the Flood. Brilliant, 15 instrumental tracks, 3 vocal tracks. He was trying to make a double album very much in the same vein as Yes's Tales from a Topographic Ocean, Pink Floyd's The Wall. He's got John Petrucci on it. It's got Guthrie Govan on it. It's got some really big names on this album, and for me, it's probably one of the most enjoyable albums of the last couple of years in this kind of realm, along with the Aristocrats, The Duck, which we're going to talk about. His main influences are Rush, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Metallica, and so on. So, he has a heavy feel to him as well. He's filled in at Dream Theater before. He went to Berklee College to learn to play bass, or guitar, and then he sort of decided to stay there for bass, and there we go from there. Same with Guthrie Govan. Guthrie Govan went to university to study English, decided that, hey, I'm not bothering that anymore. I think I'm more going to go and be a guitarist, right? A musician. He is a perfect bass player to sit alongside, as I said, Marco Minnemann, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But the thing about Brian Bella is he's one of those names that you may not have heard of. Guthrie Govan, to most people, they've seen stuff. Marco Minnemann is a name that most musos will know, but Brian Bella might not be the one of those ones. And he's a very quiet, astute fellow, and he just, as I said before, doesn't take his eyes, if he can, off of Marco, because he's trying to work out what Marco's doing intuitively already knows what Guthrie's going to do, because he doesn't play Guthrie's guitar lines. He's not playing the same as a guitar one octave down, and that's all he's doing. He's weaving in and out between the drums and the guitar, and he's making his instrument not being lost, because it could easily be lost amongst the madness of Marco and the virtuosity of Guthrie quite easily. But he finds his sense of humour, he finds his direction, and he locks it in. And there are points there where I was listening to him, and I could hear it cut through. Sometimes live, the bass disappears a bit, depending on the mix. Now, I was standing directly on the left-hand side of the stage, right in front of right in front of Guthrie, and Brian was right on the other side, and they didn't cross over, they didn't move around. And so sometimes in that mix, unless you're middle of the arena or middle of the stage, you can lose some of that. I didn't lose it though. I felt that it was very much there amongst the sound. I thought it was a brilliant. I mean, it was one of the best concerts I've ever been to. Actually, I don't remember it actually starting or finishing. It was that sort of crazy. It was that intense musically. But then we now have to come to Marco Miniman. Now, I see that it's almost half past, so I've been half an hour. We'll get to the half an hour mark with this, and then we'll have a break and chat about the album on the other side. So, Marco Miniman, born in Germany, and in 1970, he's released over a dozen albums as a drummer. He's a multi-instrumentalist, a vocalist. He's performed over 100 studio albums. I'm not even going to name most of them because the whole episode will be taken up with it. His latest collab, actually, outside of the Aristocrats, is a band called it's a funk metal fusion band called the Freaky Funkin' Weirdos. And that's Weidoz Weirdos. And he obviously has worked, as I said before, with Stephen Wilson on those 3 albums that we mentioned before, Raven that refused to sing, Hand That Cannot Erase, and 4.5. He's done some crazy stuff. So he recorded a 53-minute drum solo, which he used as a foundation for one of his solo albums. You know, this man is, to drummers, he's in the same league, and I know people look at me askance when I say this, but he's in the same league as Keith Moon, as John Bonham, as Ginger Baker. He's just there because there's something about the way that he creates music out of drums. Now, most people, look at drummers, particularly, they like to joke, don't they? Oh, it's just a drummer, right? Oh, it's just the drummer. What was the old joke? How do you know there's a drummer dead in the middle of the road? Because there's no swerve marks in front of him. Things like that, it sort of annoys me because the beauty of what Marco does is extremity. It's equally as beautiful as what one of the greatest drummers of all, of Ringo Starr, the simplicity that Ringo brought to exactly the same as the intensity that Marco brings. And watching him live, like he had one of his bass drums up using it like a tom, and he would move around that kit like an octopus. Like, he was so open-armed. I've told it before. He's not tight-shouldered, really flexible and open-shouldered, and just the work on the cymbals alone make your hair stand on end. Like, he did I think it was like a 12 to 13 minute drum solo during the set, and it was not at one point where I went, can you stop doing it? Like the same way that Neil Peart, you wouldn't say, can you stop doing that drum solo? Because you watch them, you think, oh my God, these guys are just outrageously talented. And it's like I said, he would grab, he had a squeaky toy, and he had a sample machine there. I don't know how he did it, but he squeaked the squeaky toy. It was part of the whole funny part of the story of Duck, and which we'll get to. And he's squeaking the toy, and then he sort of put it on a loop, and then he was playing his drums around that loop, and it was so intense. So intense. I don't think there was one set of eyes that wasn't looking at him during that entire drum solo. You know, it was the equivalent of running a marathon, I'm sure. That guy was, it wasn't just a little basically 4/4 and whatever. He was everywhere and everywhere, doing everything. Every single part of his kit was used in an astonishing way. And you get that with his stuff here, like on this album. He's also done stuff with an international supergroup called a prog supergroup called The Sea Within. Personally, I researched that. They're just the amazing Dutch band, the Flower Kings, which I adore, by the way. And I'd say that the Flower Kings' 2019 album, Waiting for Miracles, is my pick of the best prog album of that year. It's a brilliant double album. It's full of textures, colours, and it's just brilliant. He also has done voiceovers, which is something I never do. He did the voice of an animated character in Metalocalypse. I cannot say it. Metalocalypse. Metalocalypse, yes. Those that know their heavy metal cartoons will know what that means. I was quite, to be honest, I was quite impressed by that. Considering he's a multi-instrumentalist. Again, you can tell that he's a multi-instrumentalist. Same way that Brian Belo probably is an amazing guitarist, and the way that Guthrie Govan has this... He's just a straight dyed-to-the-wall guitarist, but the way that he makes the guitar sing, he's almost like he's a vocalist, you know. So there's these three men come together to make some of the best instrumental music I think there is there to ever put between your ears. And Duck, the latest one, is a bit of a concept out. It's a funny story, which we'll relate to on the other side. But it took a little while, I have to be honest, for me to get into Duck. I didn't register with it as quickly as I did the first few albums, particularly the first album. And so I had to give myself some time over to it, because I knew I was going to see them live, and I was very excited to do so. And once I gave myself over to it, again, I openly admit that I found more and more textures and depths and colours. Like I've said this before, I like to listen to music, particularly complex music like this, with the lights off, in the dark, and just sit there, maybe with a single malt whiskey, maybe just myself on my own in my studio, and let it sort of, with the noise cancelling headphones on, let it just flow through me. And there are sections in this, particularly in the opening track, which we'll come to, and the final track, which is my favourite, that just, you could listen to it 10, 15, 20 times, and you probably wouldn't get every nuance that you get with this particular, you just wouldn't get it straight away for the first listen. So it's impossible. What I'd urge you to do is not just to go, all right, well, Tones has said this, I've listened to this, I put it on and think, oh, it's not for me, I'll put it away. If it's not, fair enough. But if you're enjoying it, don't just hit it once. Let it go through you a few times, like a decent curry. Let it go through you a few times. And I think that Guthrie would enjoy that. He's got a bit of a weird sense of humour. Let that sink in, because the tracks themselves are not something you can just pull out. It's certainly not a singles band, so you're not going to say, hey, one track or the other. But they do need to be played in the order of which they have been put on the album, because as I've said before, it's part of my ultimate chagrin that people shuffle tracks when an artist spends their life and the hours of their life giving up their lives to work out which way this music should go and the arguments that they would cause amongst themselves, and then we go and just shuffle it. Anyway, different episode. I've done an episode about that, so you can go back and listen to my thoughts on that. Anyway, that's the band. Brilliant that they are. I've chatted for almost half an hour because I was so excited to talk about this particular band, and you can't just pass over. I've only really quickly skimmed over the backgrounds to all three members of the band. There is so much more to them that I could talk about, but as I said, I only have an hour and I want to get as much as I can in. So that's enough for now. I'm going to go and get myself a hot drink. Just have some adverts. You can squeeze past them if you want, or you can go to Patreon, and for $2 of your Earth dollars a month, you get ad-free streams of the episode that come out every week, and some behind-the-scenes videos and some unedited audio. Anyway, I'll leave the link in my bio below. I'd love you to come and join. It does help me keep the lights on and pay for the bills. It also, I'd like you to, if you can, like and subscribe. Swipe up, give me some stars on Spotify. It makes more people get a chance to see me. Leave reviews on whatever your choice of streaming platform is. Anyway, bye for now. Enjoy the ads, or as I said, skip through, and I'll talk to you on the other side. Ta-ta. Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of Heavy Metal Tones with me, your podcast host Tony Evans, where we're going to talk about Duck, the latest album by the Aristocrats. We have talked about the band on the first part. This is now about the album. It is an interesting album, as a fact it is, as I said before, is instrumental. It is heavier than you think it is. A lot of people don't realise that it's actually quite a dense and heavy album. So those that have already sort of decided, we'll listen to the end, but I'm not sure I'm going to like it. You think you will, because it is actually a really textured, layered, and a very interesting piece of music. But it's also a conceptual album. It's called Duck. It's about a duck's journey from Antarctica to New York and encountering his various adventures and misadventures along the way. The story is inspired by the band's own experiences and the process of relocating to a new place, specifically Guthrie Govan's move from England to South Carolina. Each song on the album, each 9 tracks on the album, covers each sort of part of the journey of Duck. The album cover is, you'll see in the artwork, it's a fantastic sort of modern, almost a computer game image, very modern comic take on, it looks like a dark side of Daffy Duck, or any of those kind of cartoons. Excuse my ignorance, I'm not a cartoon person, but, that kind of thing. Scrooge McDuck, but modern, that kind of look. Anyway, the album itself is broken into, as I said, 9 tracks. Okay, 9 tracks. Each, as I said, also each one written by one member of the band for the other, as we talked about in the first part. It's tradition with their music, and each taking us on a journey through with Duck all the way. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to read you the first chapter of the Duck's journey that in lines with the first track, and then I'll leave the in the show notes. I'll put a link to the website page where you can go and read all of the chapters in line with the music, because there's a lot to read, and if I was going to do it, A, it would probably bore the pants off you, but secondly, it would take up more than the time I have left. Anyway, the tracks are Hey, Where's My Drinks Package? Aristoclub, that is, Sergeant Rockhopper, Sitting with a Duck on a Bay, love that, Here Come the Builders, Muddled Through, Slideshow, and Then There Were Just Us, Duck, and This Is Not Scrotum. I love the name of that last track. Actually, one of my favourite tracks on the album, actually, not because of the... sorry, and I apologise. And then there were just us. Duck's End is the actual name of that track. I missed the end bit of it. But anyway, so I'll read you what I think of firstly, the opening track musically, and what I thought of it. So here we go. My notes. There we are. Okay, now I've written it. Opens with a real swing, a real show off of Marco Minimum's drum style. It's very jazzy, very open, very fluent. Lots of really lush, light touches across the kit. As I said, very, very open-armed. And then straight into really one of my favourite riffs on the album by Guthrie. It's a real sort of... It has a real modern feel. It reminds me of Steve Vai. It reminds me of Devon Townsend Project. It's got a real bluesy and soulful and jazz feel, but it's also feels like it's taking us on a journey. It's off we go, right? It's quite a swing field track. It's very difficult to actually describe um, instrumental music. It's sort of thing that you're best off listening to. It's easier to describe lyrical content because you can always talk about um, meanings behind things. This technically is quite hard for me to do, so I hope that I get it correctly. But it's it's a really fast paced and interesting directional changes on this particular track. Right, there's glissando, there's timbre, there's you name it. There's all sorts of different musical devices as we seek to change direction to think, hey, I'm at, well, at one point we think, I know where I'm up here, and suddenly we're going to a different time signature. We're straight into a bit of Brian Beller's amazing bass. In fact, his bass playing on this album was superb all the way through. He has some standout tracks himself, but I think this track here is a standout for Guthrie Govan. This is the one I think his track. It's what shows his virtuosity. I put my teeth in, shall I? Hang on. Have a drink, that'll help. No, yeah, the virtuosity that he has in his fingers, and then sort of, as I said before, Brian's bass is doing different things to what Marco's doing, to what Guthrie's doing. It's that sort of jazz direction, but it's also extremely modern, extremely fast, extremely heavy, and it does have a feel of like 90s guitar sort of dueling. You know, when we had all the fast people doing as many notes they could get into a bar. It sort of feels that sort of Van Halen, Vi, Satriani, all those sort of people, Malmsteen, all those. It has a real neoclassical groove, actually. You know, it starts off heavy, and then at 3 minutes, 3 minutes in, suddenly on a dime it stops, and it's doing this sort of lounge jazz kind of thing going on with this sort of light timpani and light work on brushstrokes on the cymbals, and the bass is sort of doing a little bit of a walking bass line, and the guitar is just there picking out odd pizza notes here and there, because before then we had this crazy guitar solo, which is what Guthrie does so well, and then suddenly just breaks and you're into this little piece of middle eight almost that makes you stop and think again. And this particular trope happens throughout the album. This is not just on this track. It's something they do very well and quite often, actually. You know, in the space of almost 7 minutes, you have like more styles than you can shake a stick at. You know, they don't stay in one position very long. They move from, you know, improvised fusion jazz to you know, guitar pyrotechnics to light jazz, blues notes, you know, and then they're going into some crazy sort of 60s Floyd-esque kind of free fall sort of jam. It's just a thing of magic, actually. And it's, again, this is what sort of echoes throughout the album quite regularly. And, you know, I mean, the story, I think, to be honest, compared to the music, is quite irrelevant, because you can make any story up for this piece of music, but it's nice to have the story. So, as I said, this is the first chapter of the album for the Duck album. For Hey, Where's My Pink Drinks Package? Where's my pink strackage? I almost said there. Where's my drinks package? Question mark. Here you go. I have to put on some acting here. Chapter 1. Hey, where's my drinks package? Question mark. I'll have another drink. DD Duck put up his hand. The barkeep squinted at him. You sure? Yeah, I'm sure. The pour wasn't too generous, but more than a strictly measured shot. Typical for a big city bar. Duck downed it quickly, but it didn't drown out his regret. I should have done it. I shouldn't have done it. I should have gone there. I should have kept quiet. Then the whole thing never would have happened. The barkeep nodded. Rough day? Rough month, Duck played with his empty shot glass. Could have just kept my head down, gone somewhere else, but no, I had to go there. The bartender nodded while serving his other patrons. Duck stared at the empty glass again. I had a job, I had a life. It was boring, yeah, but it was fine. He tried to convince himself before this incident. The bartender caught his eye. Where you from? Duckside, South Georgia Island. Never heard of it. Duck's father's face flashed before his eyes. What would he think of me now? Would he think it was right, what I just did? Was that what he was trying to say all those times? Give me one more. You're getting close to the line, buddy. The barkeep stared into Duck's eyes. Duck glared back insistent. Okay, one more, just one. The bartender served up another shot in a tumbler, which he slid down the bar. Duck caught it without flinching. The barkeeper's eyebrows shot up. Taken aback by his patron's reflexes, the Duck opened up his bill and made the shot disappear. Where I'm going to go, what am I going to do? 30 minutes later, Duck was still staring down at the bar, muttering to himself. He looked up and noticed the sign on the wall for the first time. Delicious drink package pairings, $40. The picture displayed 2 different pairs of frosty beers, shot glasses, combos. Everything looked golden brown and delicious to a drinker. Duck raised his hand once again and pointed at the sign. I'll have one of those, he shouted. Oh no, you won't. You're over the line already, Ducko. Duck's feathers bristled a bit. Oh, give me a break. You're in the get people drunk business and I want to get drunk. Are you a bartender or a hall monitor? The bartender stood up straight and rolled up his sleeves. One more line like that and you're out of here. Duck knew he'd mouthed off and reached for that familiar instinct. Keep quiet. But the alcohol bucked in. One more line like what? The bartender snapped his fingers twice. A burly bouncer, twice Duck's size, came bounding over. Show him the street. He seems to want to see up close. The bouncer yanked Duck airborne and dragged him towards the exit. Angry and disappointed, Duck kept thinking to himself, I was having a pretty good time just a little while ago. And that's the end of that chapter. So you can see what's happening. He's obviously got a sorrowful tale to tell, but we won't know, and I'm not going to tell you until you read it yourself. Because chapter 2 is the Aristocrat, which is set 5 hours earlier. Anyway, the music itself on this album, as I said, it speaks for itself. There are moments of joy, there are moments of expression, interest. It's virtuosity at its very best, in my opinion. I've written here that some of the tracks, like track 4, for instance, Sitting with a Duck on the Bay, which is a lovely play on words, is very Steve Vai. It's very full of. It very reminds me a lot of Passion and Warfare, which is one of my favorite Steve Vai albums. I saw him on that tour. It was amazing. It's got a very modern sound. It's also got a lot of real traditional kind of funky bass and crazy infusion drumming by Marco and by Brian. But it's very driving. It's very delicious. It's extremely heavy. I feel it's actually one of my favourites on the album. I think the whole album is actually a brilliant package right through. But Sitting with a Duck on the Bay is possibly one of my favourite. As I said, This Is Not Scrotum is actually a brilliant one. And when they played that live, I think they finished the show on it. It was absolutely brilliant. But there's something I want to say that the thing about someone like Guthrie Govan is he uses the wah like no other guitarist, I think, definitely since Eric Clapton's Cream era. Wah is a tricky effect to capture, to not sound overused, to not sound, overplayed. I know that some guitarists like from Dire Straits, like Mark Knopfler, he opens up his wah and leaves it just on that gate, that sort of hinterland between on and off, and that's how he gets that sound on the Brothers in Arms album, right? But someone that actually sort of can make the wah talk, there's only a few people. I'd say Clapton, I'd say Frampton, the two for me that really, and Hendrix to some extent, but really there was more depth and colour in Clapton's 70s, 60s and 70s wah work with Cream. It also, for those that were listening overseas in England or expats in Australia of a certain age, there was a program called Grange Hill. It was a very long running kids drama on children's TV set in a school called Grange Hill, a fictitious school called Grange Hill. And the opening credits is extremely nostalgic to all of us of a certain age. And when I first heard this, I thought that that the band were basically riffing on Grange Hill, right? So you find there's little bits into it that I find myself just delicious, because suddenly you go, oh God, Grange Hill, even though it's not Grange Hill, but it just has that kind. If you want to, what I'll do is I'll put a link. In fact, I'll put a link in the show notes to a YouTube clip to the opening credits of Grange Hill, and I'll link it with the name "Sitting with a Duck on a Bay," so you can understand where I'm coming from. And there's no real slowdown, like muddle through slideshow, and then there were just us, Duck's End. They all have highlights, a lot of jazz scatting in it, like the way that the wah cheekily scats through it's almost like on an instrumental album. This is the vocals. It's like the duck singing. It has a real duck's voice, and I think that's what. Remember, I think I do. I remember Guthrie talking about that live. That they were trying to create that duck sound with the wah, and it does really work. It actually has a real life to its own of its own. There's a lot of great moments that are really well mixed as well. Like, the thing about this album is that it doesn't ever, some really classical old school instrumental albums, and to name one of them, which is still one of my favorite albums of all time, which is Snow Goose, right, it's still by Camel, it still has moments where you sort of it muddles a bit and gets lost and doesn't quite know where it's going, to be fair. And so, to some extent, lots of those instrumental pieces by ELP and Yes, they just sort of don't know how to resolve themselves. They feel sometimes like one musical thought tacked to another, in the way to, we want to use this bit, I don't know how, can we squeeze it in here? Yes, it sounds okay, I think we can make it work. Whereas, and it does work, obviously, but you can often tell, whereas the pieces on this album and what these guys do in this band is almost flawless, because the changes of pace and direction and thought pattern and emotion on this album is sublime. It's superb. It doesn't. There's no lull in it. You don't get to a part in the album and go, "Oh God, we should move on to the." I just need to move on. I'm getting a little bit stuck in this this motif, because no longer do you get used to one motif when another one jumps in. And I said there's glissando, there's uvulation. There's a lovely word for you, isn't it? Uvulation. Look it up, people. We'll see what it means. And it's just got that lovely slide up and down, vibrations, and it's something that I find actually weirdly, it depends on the situation I'm listening to it. Yeah, this morning I was listening to it on the bus again on the way to work, and it actually soothed me to the point where I was so relaxed sitting on the bus, because often like tense on a bus, a lot of strangers and smells, and got to go to work and all that. Thought of 8 hours ahead of you, and it sort of relaxed me. Whereas other times when I've put it on around the house, for instance, I've got really motivated to do things. Same with a lot when I listened to it live. There was a real motivation to actually. The takeaway for me was, I want to go and do something like that. How amazing would it be to make that kind of music with good friends? And it's I know that I'm waffling on here, but it is the case. It's a fantastic album. Like I said, each track has a story attached, a chapter attached to each track. I don't want to give away the story. I want you to click on the link, read the stories, listen to the track, maybe listen to the track first, then read the story, then listen to the track, read the story, and go on. I wouldn't read the whole thing before you listen to the music. Maybe read the little chapter either while you're listening to it or before you listen to it, and see if it captures your imagination. Like I said, it really is like a piece of music that's quite timeless. It's so virtuosic and so beautiful. Brian Bella's bass and Malcolm Inham's drums and Guthrie's guitar. It's sensational, and you could put any story you want to it in your own imagination, really, and still come out with a beautiful landscape in your mind of pictures versus sound. But hey, why not sit there and read it and do what maybe if you read it and then listen to it, does it make you think differently of the music? I have done it, and I listened to it a track, then I read the chapter, I listened to the track. Did it the other way. I listened to the track, read the chapter. And to be honest with you, it does change the way you listen to it in the way that you do it. Particularly if it's first time through, right? Because when you're listening to the music after you've read the story, you're trying to hear musical cues that link with the conceptual story. And the other way around is that if you listen to it if you read about after you listen to it, then you're trying to, in memory, put audio cues or written cues into music you don't quite remember at those points. It's a really interesting little thing to do. It's also brilliant to be heard in the dark. I really like it lying in bed or in a hot bath or in a dark room, because you don't have to worry about understanding anything at all. There's no understanding this. There's just acceptance of its beauty and its interestingness and its woven audio concepts, the way it flows from the lowest of lows to the highest of highs, strange fusion injections of jazz and blues and heavy rock and heavy metal and punk in some parts, and walking bass lines, and sometimes it takes me to bars in New Orleans in 1920. Sometimes it takes me to Cream at the playing at the Albert Hall. Other times it's 1989 and I'm at Steve Vai, watching Steve Vai play Passion and Warfare. It has those little touches that bring the beauty to this album. And honestly, Zal Clemson from the Sensational Alex Harvey band, which we talked about before, was one of the biggest influences on his growing up as a child, because his father's Scottish. It's sort of, you can hear that as well. That sort of, there was a craziness to Zal's playing in the 70s that you got with Sensational Alex Harvey band, and I highly recommend you going back and listening to my episode about the band, and you sort of feel this border. It's like they're sort of sitting on this liminal border between radio-friendly music and intellectual music. They're sitting on that border. Most of the time, they're ticking over the other side onto the intellectual side, but there are points where it tips over, where the music could easily be enjoyed by anyone. It doesn't have to be intellectualized. It's just a brilliant moment of musical madness, in all shapes and forms. I hope you enjoyed this review. As I said, I'm not going to do every track by track, because it's very difficult and it would be very boring, because I find myself repeating myself again and again, which I sometimes do anyway, as you probably know. But as I said, do as you want. Read the notes, read the story, then listen to the music, or listen to music, then read the story. And do that maybe back and forth throughout the album. Do it in different ways as the whole album goes through, and see how you visualize the music each time you do it. It'd be interesting. I mean, this is my probably fifth or sixth listen and read through, and I'm still hearing different music to different parts of the story every time I do it. So it's not a one size fits all. You'll do it once and you'll never hear anything different, because guaranteed that you will hear different musical little moments of madness, little moments of perfection and joy, just fragments that pop up here and there that will make you smile, make you scratch your head and wonder how they do it. And honestly, watching them live do it, if they can do it live, and they do, it's not exact on, because they play a fusion style where so you might have a little bit of difference here and there each night you see them. That's the beauty of live music anyway, isn't it? Anyway, that's enough for me. Please do like and subscribe. Come and see me on TikTok and on Facebook, and go and grab yourself a download of this. Click on the link on my in the show notes below. Read the story, as I said. Listen to the music, and also, if I can find it, and it's down there, hopefully it is, you'll see how the Grange Hill theme, and then can let me know whether I'm going mad or you can actually hear it. Anyway, bye for now. Talk to you next week. Keep safe.
El rugido de los aficionados, el ritmo de las porras, la intensidad en la cancha. Esto es más que solo un partido de fútbol. Con DraftKings Sportsbook, esta es tu oportunidad de convertir cada jugada en una gran ganancia. Descarga la app de DraftKings Sportsbook y usa el código HEART. Ese es el código HEART para que los nuevos usuarios reciban $200 en bonus bets al instante cuando apuestes solo $5. En asociación con DraftKings, la corona es tuya. ¿Problemas con el juego? Llama al 1-800-GAMBLER. En Nueva York, llama al 877-8-HOPE-NY o envía un mensaje de texto con la palabra HOPE-NY al 467-369. En Connecticut, hay ayuda disponible para problemas con el juego. Llama al 888-789-7777 o visita ccpg.org. Juega responsablemente. En nombre de Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. Debe ser mayor de 21 años. La elegibilidad varía según la jurisdicción. No válido en Ontario. Pueden aplicarse cargos en Illinois. Las apuestas de bonos son de un solo uso. La apuesta no se incluye en las ganancias y caducan después de ser otorgadas. La oferta finaliza el 29 de septiembre 2025 a las 11:59 p.m. hora del este. Los términos en DraftKings.com/sportsbook/promos.